In the podcast, we heard definitions of scientism from both Ferdier and Sotiris. I first encountered the idea of scientism when I was about 16, reading a book from the 19th century called God and the State by the Russian anarchist Mikhail Bakunin. I discussed the topic of scientism in the soon-to-be-released Chapter 2 of my second video essay. What follows is an excerpt from that essay, in which I define and discuss the concept of scientism with reference to Bakunin. The term scientism expresses a general social concern about science being misused for ideological, self-serving, or other illegitimate purposes. It is used to criticize the improper uses of scientific methods or knowledge, and the associated misbehavior of scientists, especially when exercising undue authority over people, typically in allegiance with government. Scientism occurs under the guise of superior expert knowledge, whose complexity allegedly surpasses the capacity of ordinary people to comprehend, rendering their consent or participation in decision-making either undesirable or positively harmful in the eyes of the scientistic authority. Scientism also has a secondary, related meaning, referring to the dangers of pseudoscience operating under the guise of legitimate science, by perversely imitating its language, style, and aesthetics. An example of this would be forms of professional certification, which are disingenuously designed to look like proper medical or scientific training, when they actually lack the relevant credentials or certification. Far from being reactionary, anti-modern, or anti-scientific, this concern is actually quite widely shared, from religious conservatives through to unconventional, non-political authors like Jung, and even by some anti-theological and revolutionary thinkers, like the anarchist Mikhail Bakunin, whose critique of Marxism for its scientistic pretensions in the 19th century stands up as remarkably prescient almost 200 years later. Scientism, for Bakunin, is only the most recent, most modern example of how power tends to corrupt those who wield it. Bakunin summarized the rationale behind the fear of scientism, Marxian or otherwise, in 1871. Quote, "A scientific body to which had been confided the government of society would soon end by devoting itself no longer to science at all, but to quite another affair. And that affair, as in the case of all established powers, would be its own eternal perpetuation, by rendering the society confided to its care ever more stupid, and consequently more in need of its government and direction." And that's the end of the excerpt from the essay. Bakunin's critique of scientism was directed, in large part, against the followers of his contemporary Karl Marx, whom he suspected of harboring authoritarian and indeed scientistic ambitions inside the vagaries of his political rhetoric, such as the phrase dictatorship of the proletariat, which was popularized by Marx and Engels in the 19th century. His critique of scientism is especially interesting, considering that Bakunin, himself a Russian, was just as enthusiastic about modern science, the Enlightenment, and his own emancipatory vision of socialism, as Marx and Engels were about their visions of socialism.